The Shark Deck.
You guys think I'm kidding about the iced coffee thing. Here's one. The ice is melted. This is the third straight podcast I'm recording because I had to work in advance. Sometimes I need to do that. Hi, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. The New York Times asked, whatever happened to local comedy scenes? The inspiration for this was that new book that I've told you about, The Perfect Amount of Wrong, The Rise of Alt Comedy on Chicago's North Side. I've mentioned it before, that book talks about the comedy scene of the early aughts, in which folks like Kumail Nanjiani, Kyle Kinane, Pete Holmes, Hannibal Buress, Beth Stelling, and Cameron Esposito were hitting the clubs. The book asks questions like, did T.J. Miller revolutionize crowd work? I've never pondered that question. I want to say no, but if T.J. Miller didn't revolutionize crowd work, who did? I'm tempted to say Patrice O'Neal, maybe, perhaps, possibly, but not. Another question, does Matt Bronger deserve to be compared to Robin Williams and Will Ferrell? The Times writes, this book should start some fights. Time out. An article from Slate in 2012 about Patrice O'Neal. I've mentioned in the past. I did not at all enjoy my time with Patrice O'Neal in person. Even when you were off stage, backstage, he would still come at you and I was just like, dude, just go away. But Slate wrote about some of Patrice's crowd work and said, his interlocutor at that particular moment is a man he's already put on the defensive, a man whose date seemed less than excited when the show began. After pointing this out, O'Neal reads the man's body language and decides he really doesn't like the woman he's with. Then he makes fun of the man for getting touchy, and he finally asks the woman how old she is in order to contrast her with a younger woman sitting nearby, whose comeliness O'Neal has already commented on. By needling his crowd like this, O'Neal manages to peel away the social niceties that keep people guarded and nervous and less likely to laugh. And so, once he's ready, he can start talking about his life, often without even really telling jokes, and absolutely kill. Skipping ahead, this is a good article. I might come back to this in another episode. At one point, ready to launch into a bit about differences between white women and black women, he strikes up conversation with another man by asking him what his name is. When the man tells him it's Tolu, O'Neal just stops. He then launches into a hilarious, apparently improvised rant about black parents giving their children African names and the ways that black and white kids respond to those names. The crowd dies. It's the funniest track on the album, Mr. P. I'm going to bookmark this and come back to this a different day because I'm telling you about the New York Times asking what happened to the local comedy scenes. The Times writes, there's a long history of cities producing their own comedic aesthetics. Boston is blustery and blue collar. Think of Bill Burr. While San Francisco is wild and experimental. See Robin Williams. Washington, D.C. and Portland, Oregon have their own styles too. These are all simplifications, but they matter. When everybody can see everyone else online, parallel thinking and jokes increases, and comics move to New York and L.A. quickly after viral fame, making coherent local identities harder to maintain. Who you're around as a young artist is tremendously important. Now, we all are, to some degree, around the same people. To be sure, you had to be there is a real thing, especially with live comedy, and the internet is full of niches where subcultures can flourish, but whether they'll be closely associated with cities is an open question. Good stuff from the Times. Times does a great job covering comedy. The LA Times asked, will OnlyFans prove a new hub for comedy? I'll keep using my joke over and over. Hey, John, what are you doing in the basement with the door closed? I'm researching comedy for the podcast. What do you think I'm doing? A recent August showcase at Pasadena's Ice House Comedy Club was a live taping of a series called LMAOF. The room had cameras and a crowd focused on material about dating, sex, relationships, and just plain being horny. Whoa. Hey, are you listening to this podcast with children for some reason? Why don't you hit, don't even hit 30-second skip. Why don't you hit stop? Are you gone? Matt O'Brien relays a story from a rideshare driver about taking a porn star to her photo shoot. Later, O'Brien regrets having taken nude videos, if only because the email scammers blackmailing him don't have the newest, hottest version of him possible. Nate Craig said, a couple of years ago, I got my identity stolen, thieved. Married is what I meant. He did a little crowd work and said, a little insight into these OnlyFans live TV tapings. They seat the audience based on their sexual fetishes. Last November, OnlyFans announced a Whitney Cummings partnership and the launch of a new uncensored roast franchise. OFTV has released 2 of the 5 promised OnlyFans roast editions under the title Whitney Cummings Presents. April 1st saw Bert Kreischer roasted by Big J. Okerson, Tom Segura, Miranda Cosgrove, and Kesha. It has remained the most watched episode of OFTV original content to date. Whitney Cummings says, there's a dissonance between the platforms that comedians are putting comedy on and where the comedy fans actually are. Comedy shouldn't be sandwiched in between really serious political tweets, for example. Context is everything when it comes to comedy, and we're missing the context here of where comedians belong. of the OnlyFans TV platform. She says they weren't censoring. They weren't owned by some big corporate conglomerate that's going to say you can't say this, or make you worry about catering to an algorithm. It was a total dream come true. Whitney Cummings has filmed a special on September 23rd. We'll see when that's going to come out. Nearly 20 episodes in, OFTV's weekly stand-up series LMAOF features up-and-coming stand-ups. Material is not vetted. The only instructions are be funny. Whitney says everything they were taught in terms of making content for network studios or corporate sponsorship, throw out all those rules out the window and just get back to being an artist, get back to just getting down to what you want to say and how you want to say it. People want to say is take risks, and I think OnlyFans and OnlyFans TV is really the only place anyone will let us take risks. Interesting. Atsuko Okatsuka was talking about her pre-show rituals. She said, getting ahead of physical issues will really help calm yourself too, like using a humidifier at home before I go to bed so that my throat doesn't get dry when I'm performing, or wearing brand name antiperspirant. She's shilling for that again so that I know that at least I'm not sweating or smelling when I'm doing meet and greets. She even has some beauty tips. I suspect this is all sponsored by the deodorant company again. Tip 1, engage in aerobic and potentially dangerous vocal warm-ups. She says, I do a light version of what I think other people do. I've started doing vocal warm-ups like I'm on Broadway or something. It does help me. She likes to get her body moving. I do this thing where I run really, really fast in place and then suddenly let my arms go into space. It kind of feels like you just did poppers or something. Your brain goes, and then you see black for a second. I don't know if it's healthy, but it feels good. Tip 2, reclaim your childhood haircut. It's about embracing your true inner child and the ways you really wanted to dress in your authentic self that maybe you were denying yourself when you were younger. Once I was a teenager, I wanted to be cool, so I wanted to dress and look like what was more popular and in instead of dressing like how I would have really liked to, which is how I dress now, with food earrings and rocking this haircut, which historically people make fun of and go, ooh, bowl cut, how embarrassing. Tip 3, if you have armpit odor, simply don't raise your arms. She says, when I started growing hair under my arms, my grandma was like, oh, don't lift your arms, just keep it down, and that's that. And I was like, but what about the smells and stuff? And she was like, just keep it down. Tip 4, just kidding, there's a product for that. Again, I know sponsored content when I see it. There's a product now. You don't have to hide. It's all about being your true, authentic self. You're not alone. I mean, I didn't know there was an antiperspirant that lasts for 3 whole days. The article points out the comedian has recently partnered with, sponsor name here, an antiperspirant that boasts 72 hours of protection. Tip 5, sometimes it's okay to ignore your mother's beauty advice. Atsuko says, they're of their own world. My mom doesn't really go out. My grandma's just old school. You know, she keeps telling me to put my arms down. So it's like, I think I'll find my own path with beauty if that's okay. Boy, back on Thursday, I set out to do this entire Vulture 25 Comedians You Should Know list, and that would have been like a 90-minute episode. I'm on day 3 of chipping away at this. Let's take a look at Opie Alagbaju. Opie has a lot of jokes comparing the customs of Nigeria, where he lived until he was 6, in the U.S. A joke he did in 2020, being a black immigrant is like winning the golden ticket to go to Willy Wonka's factory. You get there, you're super excited, and no, nobody told you you're an Oompa Loompa. I don't know if you know this, but Oompa Loompas are black people, okay? Go rewatch that movie. You realize the Oompa Loompas are the only people of color in the entire movie. To make matters worse, Willy Wonka said, yeah, I went over to their land, and I brought them to my factory on my own boat. It's literally what he said. And you can't tell me Oompa Loompa Doopity Doom is not a Negro spiritual. Nimish Patel. I feel like he's really starting to break through. The New Jersey comedian was known for 3 things, being the #1 Google result if you Google Nimish Patel, also for being the first Indian American hired to write for SNL, and being asked to leave the stage at Columbia University in 2018 after a joke about interacting with a gay black man was deemed inappropriate by the student organizers of the show. Patel told Vulture in 2019, my comedy is socially aware and willfully ignorant. Richard Perez could have stayed perfectly content knowing he was the single funniest person on Instagram stories. When Perez gets on stage, he approaches the microphone like the shyest little prince in the kingdom, writes Vulture, taking a perfect curl of hair behind his ear and giggling bashfully before dropping the act and saying, so that was all my pride material. Perez is a thermostat performer, changing the temperature in the room on any comedy lineup, able to lure the audience into watchful silence until the smallest gesture, a fake snore or mumble, sets off peals of laughter. Jordan Temple from Queens. All right, I'm already in your corner. The Queens-born comic wrestles with big issues like mental health, race, and masculinity, but isn't afraid to splash around in the murky waters of his own struggles, from analyzing whether being hospitalized for depression should be described as trippin' or buggin', to turning an uncomfortable encounter with police into a Dr. Seuss rhyme. Aisha Ward said, I was raised Catholic, but I feel if God were real, white people wouldn't have access to ukuleles. She was hired as a writer on SNL in December of 22, just a year and a half out of college. She says, Monday morning I was clocking in at the dentist. Last night a sketch I wrote aired on SNL. Isn't life so crazy and real sometimes? There's still 6 people on this list. This is going to continue into tomorrow. From People, Kountry Wayne with a K. Kountry Wayne is getting candid about his child support payments, seeing a lot of heat on Kountry Wayne, whose real name is Dwayne Colley. He was on Sherry Shepherd's show and talked about what he splurges on. His answer, yeah, I splurge more than child support because child support would be my biggest splurge. Sherry Shepherd was intrigued and said, you splurge on child support? How much is your child support? Can I ask you that? Kountry Wayne said, yeah, my child support. Just my family cost me about $200 a month. Sherry asked, $200? No, $200,000. Sherry goes, $200,000? Kountry Wayne says, it doesn't have to cost me that much. It's just child support should come with baby mama support. Everybody come behind the children with their hands out, so I splurge on some things, cars and all that. I've got $1 million worth of cars, but ain't nothing like that child support where people with feet walk up on you. Earlier in the interview, Kountry Wayne revealed he has 10 kids with 5 different women. He is currently single after divorcing from wife Gina in 2019. The Catholic Review spoke to Jen Fulwiler, who said, I never thought I'd have kids with my background, and now I have all these kids. I'm Catholic, but I didn't expect to be Catholic. I was raised atheist, and I converted to this religion, so it's not what you might expect. It's a little bit different spin on it. Her thing is a fresh take on modern life as a woman. She says, I'm talking about mom stuff and all that, but I think it's from a little different perspective. Her influences include Jim Gaffigan, Nate Bargatze, and Taylor Tomlinson, great choices, as well as local performers in Austin, Texas, where she lives. One of them, Holly M. Johnston, who tours with Jen, and Jen says there's a lot of lesser-known female comedians that are just doing incredible work. She tries not to think of genres when developing her material. I just look at it as I need to be funny, period, end of sentence. So whatever comes to mind that's funny, I'll say it regardless of what genre I seem to be in. The only way to know you're going to get a laugh is to test it in front of audiences. So what does she do? She has a focus group of friends and neighbors who come to her garage to review her material. Jen says, I'll have them sit in my garage and I actually just read through my set. It's not really a performance. I just read it and I actually give them notebooks and paper. And then we discuss it afterwards. And it's actually extraordinarily helpful to have kind of a roundtable discussion around it. In one case, they flagged a joke that the women thought was very funny, but the men didn't get. She says, comedy is an ego check. Everybody knows the score. If you say a joke and the crowd doesn't laugh, everybody knows that you just failed on stage. Now the whole room's uncomfortable. Comedy's kind of the last bastion where you can say things that might be unpopular with certain groups of people, and if it's done in a spirit of goodwill and the person is genuinely joking about an issue, I find that crowds tend to roll with it, even if they don't share that person's political perspective or social perspective. And that's your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. See you tomorrow.